Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Payday Super webinar. Thank you all so much for registering and joining today. We have a fair bit of information to get through today, but we will try and do it as clear and concise as possible. So without further ado, let's get going. So as the 1st of July quickly approaches, we wanted to take the opportunity to present to our clients a really comprehensive breakdown of everything that they need to know before the changes kick in. So before we get started, I will take a quick moment to introduce myself. My name is Lauren Lambden. I am the practice manager here at VI Partners. I have been with the firm for about 12 years now in both a client services role, a bookkeeping role, an accounting space, so a little bit of all over. And I've been in the industry for over 15 years now, so a lot of experience and background there when it comes to all things ATO and legislation. So why are we running this webinar today? Payday Super is one of the biggest legislative changes our industry has seen in quite some time. So from 1 July 2026, and you're going to hear me repeat that date a lot throughout this webinar, Payday Super will kick in. It will affect cash flow, processes, compliance. So employers really need to understand their new obligations back to front in all elements. Our goal and our reason for hosting this webinar today is to provide clear and simple information relevant to our small business clients. There can be a lot of chatter and jargon and confusing things out there. So we're hoping to just bring through anything that you need to know and save all the wishy-washy stuff for those that don't. So today we will cover what Payday Super actually means for small businesses, what is changing and what isn't, how this affects your business on a day-to-day level, common mistakes to avoid, what you should do now to prepare, because the preparation is really important and why we're running this webinar before July even comes close, and why we've been sending out so many educational items in our newsletter if you pay attention to those. So we're trying to keep you really informed and really advanced in the preparation. And finally, how we can support you before this start date of July 2026. Next slide. So first, we're just going to go all the way back to basics, and we're just going to introduce today's content with what is superannuation. Superannuation is Australia's compulsory retirement savings system. Employers are legally required to pay super for eligible employees, contributing a minimum 12% of their ordinary earnings in addition to their wages. These contributions are invested over time and growth through compounding, and that helps employees build long-term savings and future retirement income while they are working. So now that we have some contextual background about superannuation, let's dive straight into what is Payday Super. So Payday Super is a reform that was introduced by the Australian government back in 2023. So it's been in the works for a while now. It was then legislated in 2025, and it requires employers to pay super each payday instead of quarterly from 1 July 2026. The justification for their implementation, just to give a little bit of context from their side of things, is to remove the payment delays that have contributed to over $5 billion in unpaid super each year. And they want to help that average Australian build, they've estimated around tens of thousands of extra dollars more in retirement savings over their working life due to compounding. So that's a little bit of background of where it all kind of came from. So as I said already, but just to make it super, super clear, Payday Super starts from 1 July 2026. It applies to wages paid from this date onwards, and there is no kind of grace period or staggered rollout of any kind. So from 1 July 2026, you are required to pay Payday Super, but who is required? All businesses who pay wages are required to pay Payday Super. There is no difference whatsoever for big employees or small employees, no difference for those with 100 or one employee. Every employee from 1 July 2026, every employer, sorry, from 1 July 2026 will be required. It doesn't matter if your staff are full-time, part-time, or casual. Simply put, anyone who pays wages in Australia will be affected by Payday Super. So now that we know what Payday Super is, when it exactly starts, and who is affected by it, we can start talking about how this change may affect your business. So all of a sudden, from 1 July, your super payments are going to become a lot more frequent. Moving from paying super only 4 times a year currently on a quarterly basis, some businesses are all of a sudden going to have to be paying super every single week, making it 52 times a year. So that's obviously for those employers who pay wages weekly. So the frequency of super payments is a large consideration that will have an impact on your cash flow timing. Employment Hero, which is a software provider in payroll space, they actually have done some research and they have indicated that the average small medium enterprise with approximately 20 employees will require $124,000 in additional working capital to manage the shift from quarterly to a more frequent super system. It will also place a much greater reliance on the payroll system and processes, as those errors or delays will be picked up so much faster. Importantly, there is also far less opportunity to just catch up later. So accuracy, timing, and payroll discipline really do become critical from day one, because at the end of the day, if there are mistakes made or things missed, it is the employer, you guys, who will take that hit for any penalties or late payments. So, with cash flow being the biggest change employers will face with Payday Super, let's dive a little bit more into the numbers and give some real examples on what this would look for a small business. So, this will just help us understand with real figures rather than just words about me saying it's going to affect cash flow, it's going to affect this. Let's look at some real changes. In the example on the screen, we have a business who has 10 employees. Their total wages come to a very nice and clean $12,000 exactly, which is good for our example. The super guarantee rate is 12%, and their pay frequency for this employer is weekly. So under Payday Super, instead of, as you can see on the example, super building up and being paid later on in our timeline, $1,440 now leaves that business every single week alongside the wages that is paid. You can see that across July, August, and September, that cash flow output is constant and immediate. Under the old quarterly system, that same amount, which is a total of $18,720, wouldn't have been paid up till 28 days after the end of the quarter. So that timing delay originally has given many businesses breathing room, and that breathing room now disappears. The practical result from this example is that cash flow outflows are brought forward, cash flow pressure will show up earlier, and there is far less capacity to absorb issues and do that catch up later payment. If your payroll or your cash flow isn't working smoothly, the impact will be felt straight away and not at the end of the quarter. The next example that I've got on the screen is continuing our theme of cash flow and why it's such a big change. And we have a chart that shows just more evidence of that. So the same example as before, we have the business with 10 employees, $12,000 in weekly wages, a 12% super rate, and we are also assuming there have been no customer payments coming in during that month. So just a disclaimer, this business has terrible payments by their customers and they've had no money come in. So on the left, the business starts with $30,000 in the bank account, and under the old quarterly super system, after 4 weeks, the business is down in their bank to around $18,000. But crucially, it's still managing cash flow because the super liability hasn't even left the bank account yet. Under Payday Super, that now changes. Super is paid each week alongside wages, and that same 4-week period that the cash position drops to around $23,760. So the total super liability hasn't changed. What's changed is the timing of when that cash leaves the business. So that's really the key point we're trying to make today. Payday Super will accelerate your cash flow outflow, which means your business will feel that pressure a lot earlier. Issues will surface much faster, and there's far less room to rely on timing differences to manage those short-term cash gaps. Now, the big one that I wanted to go through today as well is July. So July will be that transition month, and it's one that may catch out some businesses and something that you will really need to pre-plan for. So we're again using that same really basic example. We've got 10 employees, $12,000 in weekly wages, and a 12% super rate. July, so this July 2026, is where we're going to see both of our payroll super systems overlap. So by the 28th of July, the business will still need to pay their June quarter super of $18,720 under the old quarterly rules. So that's your April to June quarterly super. At the same time as that amount being due and being paid, Payday Super has already started. So it means that for this employer with a weekly wage cycle, they are already having to pay their Payday Super each week with their wages. That would be $1,440 each week, or across that month of July, $5,760. Together, adding those amounts, that is a total super cash outflow of $24,480 in the month of July. So that's just under $6,000 more than a normal month would be, purely due to this transitional timing. The ATO has made it very clear that any super paid in July will be applied first to the outstanding June quarter obligation. So first it goes to the June quarter super obligation. So that means if a business doesn't keep up with both their quarterly payment and the new, for this example, weekly payments of Payday Super, could be fortnightly, could be monthly. These all depend on your pay frequency. It's just easy to use that weekly example. The July Payday Super amounts will be the ones that fall behind. So they'll go We're taking any payments made in July for June quarter, even if it was meant for your new Payday Super. So this is where that risk really increases, because what happens is under Payday Super, missed or late payments will trigger consequences a lot faster, and the fees and penalties are actually significantly harsher than under the current system. Once a payment is missed, it can snowball really quickly. You can get behind really quickly, and it would turn what was previously a short-term cash flow timing into a compliance and penalty problem. So July, again, just to reiterate, is that one-off spike. Businesses that plan and adjust will go very smoothly. Just factor it into your cash flow. But those who don't plan and don't factor that little transitional month change into your cash flow will find yourself behind immediately right at the start of the new change. So that's why we today are encouraging businesses where possible to pay that June quarter super even before the month ends if your pay timings allow, or at a minimum making sure that that June quarter super is paid in the first week of July. Okay, so another change that does coincide with Payday Super is the closure of the ATO Small Business Clearinghouse, which was a method that some of our clients have been using to make their super payments. So that means for anyone who is using that method, you need to find a new way to make your super payments. In addition to that, we are aware of some of our clients that are using a more manual method of paying the superannuation, such as direct to the fund. So what that will do with the introduction of Payday Super is place an increased focus on timing and accuracy. So it is important that you look at your current method of super payments to ensure that what you are doing at the moment can be handled in the easiest way possible. So just to give some context, there are two main ways that super is paid. The most common method, and those who pay super through the Zero Auto Super, this is you guys on the left, is a clearinghouse. So a clearinghouse will take one payment from your business and it will then distribute the payment to all the different super funds for your employees. And it keeps records of contributions and compliance. And this is why most employers and most payroll systems have relied and will continue to rely on this approach. It really is the easiest way. The other option is paying directly to employees' super funds. So this is far less common, but we still do see it. It's much more manual. It creates more room for errors. And especially when it comes to the fact that payments will need to be made every payday cycle under Payday Super, it's maybe a disaster waiting to happen. So as super moves to being paid more frequency, having that reliable clearinghouse and payroll setup becomes really important because that timing and accuracy and record keeping really do matter much more than they did under the quarterly system. One thing to just remember, and an important point that I just wanted to raise on this slide with that warning sign below, is that super is only considered paid when it is received by the employee's super fund. So this means that any delays caused by a bank or a clearinghouse or a processing issue can still result in your super being treated as late, even if you ran the payroll on time and you processed it on time on your end. The employer will remain responsible and can still be faced with those penalties and interest that we'll talk about shortly. So that's why it's important to make sure you understand the processing times of the method that you pay super. Some of the common mistakes we do expect to see when businesses transition to Payday Super are on the screen. So the first one that I'll go through is those businesses who will just assume that it's an admin change. So while it mechanically will sit inside Xero, the real impact that we believe small businesses will face is the impact on cash flow. And that's a really hard one to fix after the fact. Another big one is not adjusting for your cash flow planning early enough. It coincides with that first point. Because your super is now leaving the business each pay cycle, any gaps in your cash flow planning will show up a lot sooner. So poor data management will become much more visible because there's less time for buffer to absorb any late customer payments. On the system side of things, we're expecting to see problems where businesses don't update their payroll and super setup correctly, particularly around those clearinghouses that we just spoke about, and payment timing and staff who maybe are paid irregularly. So it's important to look at those. A risky assumption is the fact that people will rely on the old habit of, oh, I'll just catch up later. Under Payday Super, that flexibility will disappear, and leaving super unpaid for even a really short period can escalate very quickly. And finally, we see businesses maybe leaving it too late to ask for help or carrying over late super from before 1 July 2026, which will just create that compounding issue right at the point where compliance rules will become much stricter. So the common theme for this slide is that the businesses who prepare early and adjust will have no problems, and it will find that this will just be a really smooth transition. So you're all doing that really first key step of attending the informative webinars. So it's already front of mind for your businesses. So you're really all on the right track so far. Okay, so the next one that I've got is about the penalty changes. And I'll show you those in dollars, not just in theory. So on the left-hand side is the current quarterly system. So currently, I'm not sure, some of you on the call may have experienced this in the past, where late super and how it's assessed. So currently, late super is assessed once per quarter. And if that super is late, then there is a super guarantee charge, and it includes currently 3 really simple components. You have the unpaid super, you have a 10% interest calculated from the start of the quarter, and you get charged a flat $20 admin fee per employee. So in this example, what I've assumed is that we've got a business with 5 employees and $6,000 of super was paid 30 days late. So under the current rules, that would result in a cost of $6,149. That is made up of $6,000 in unpaid super, so our top line here, $49 roughly in interest, and $100 in admin fees. So that is what happens currently if you're late with superannuation. From 1 July 2026, under Payday Super, this is where the changes really become significant in terms of penalties and interest. Late super is now assessed every pay run, not quarterly, and the super guarantee charge still includes the unpaid super, but interest will now be called notional earnings, and it will start from the payday, not the start of the quarter. The biggest change in the new penalties and interest regime is the administration uplift. It will replace the old $20 admin fee per employee per quarter. And instead of it being a flat amount, it's a percentage-based penalty calculated on unpaid super plus interest, and it can be up to 60% if your issues aren't identified and corrected early. So that same example as I just had before when we got our 6,149 figure, I've got the interest for our new example is similar, $50. But once you apply our 60% uplift of our administration uplift, that's where that cost significantly jumps up. We get to now $9,680. So this example is really important because it shows that upper risk outcome where issues aren't picked up early and you haven't made a voluntary disclosure to the ATO. The penalties the ATO have stated can be reduced with early action. But the key point is that $20 admin fee is gone. And if you repeatedly have small delays, it can become very expensive very quickly for your business. So the key takeaway in terms of, just to summarize the changes to penalties and interest, is that under Payday Super, the penalties are much sooner, they're more often, and they scale up much faster, which is why, again, it's just important we have that payroll accuracy, we review our processes, and our cash flow planning is front of mind because it's much more important than maybe it used to be. One important thing that I did just want to make clear is that the ATO have said that the penalty examples that we've just kind of gone through do represent the higher risk outcomes. So the ATO have come up with a system where it's deliberately designed to encourage early actions, make voluntary disclosures, pick up on errors before the ATO do, have a really clean compliance history, take corrective action, act really quickly. And then what happens is that high administrative uplift, that 60%, will reduce to a much lower percentage. So it's important that if you do find that you've made an error or there's a problem, that you find and fix it early, because it can really dramatically change the outcome of the fees and penalties that the ATO may charge for late superannuation payments. Okay, so let's move on to what implementation actually looks like in practice for a small business. So the first step would be to review your current wage cycle. So whether you pay weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, because under Payday Super, your super will be paid on that same cycle. So whatever your payroll rhythm is, your super obligations will follow that exactly, all done at the very same time. The next step is to review how you currently pay super, and this is about that method. So that might mean that your super is paid through a payroll software like Xero, or via ATO small clearinghouse, or through a manual process, such as paying directly to the funds. This is a really critical step because if a method is manual, we touched on this just before, much more higher risk, especially if you're a weekly employer, and you want something a lot more streamlined and a lot more integrated into how you're currently processing your pays. That's the real key. Find something that is really streamlined and easy to use for yourself or your bookkeeper or whoever's processing that payroll. From there, it's important that you check your clearinghouse or your payroll system's processing times. So as I mentioned in a couple of slides ago, even if you run all your payroll on time, the super still needs to reach the employee's fund within that time frame. So it's really important that you understand how long your system takes end to end, from the payroll submission all the way to the funds being received by the super fund of your employee. That is really essential. And finally, it's good now to take the opportunity to review your employees' super details, check their stapled fund information, check any data issues. Maybe there's errors that have gone unnoticed currently just a good opportunity to review all those and make sure you are ready to go from Payday Super date. So the key message here is really, really simple for your business. Key takeaway, I guess, in terms of your implementation steps is early planning equals less stress. So businesses that work through these steps ahead of time are far more likely to transition smoothly. There'll be less surprises, better cash flow control, and significantly lower compliance risk once Payday Super begins, because we don't want to be spending any extra time dealing with the ATO than we need to be. Okay, so depending on how you currently pay super, we did think it was important just to super briefly touch on our recommended approach, which is using our preferred accounting software, Xero. So Xero is designed to handle superannuation really simply and automatically as part of the payroll. It calculates super based on each employee's earnings every time payroll is run. So there's no separate calculations that you have to do. And Xero uses a feature called Auto Super. If you have the ability to pay super in your Xero subscription, you now have access to Auto Super. They changed that about 12 months ago. And what Auto Super does is it automatically tracks payment dates based on payroll. And when super is paid, it will deduct one total amount from your bank account, covering all your employees, all 10 of your employees, and then it will distribute the correct amount to each individual super fund. So because this process is really integrated, it's semi-automated, it does remove duplicate data entry possibilities, and it will dramatically reduce that risk of errors or mispayments or timing, which is why we do recommend using Xero and their Auto Super functionality in-house. Obviously, if you've got MyOb, they will have something similar or different. Okay, I'm just conscious on time. We've just got a couple more minor slides to go, and then I think we're probably information overloaded. Now, believe it or not, we are getting really close to that Payday Super start date, as I've mentioned. There are still some things that we don't actually know yet, which is strange considering the ATO and, everyone is saying be as prepared as possible and things like that. But there are some really key things that the ATO or the clearinghouses still have to put together. So the first thing that we don't know yet, and it's on Xero's side of things mainly, I'm not too sure about MyOb or other software like QuickBooks or Payroll or whether they've released anything yet, but some software providers still haven't released how Payday Super will function in their software, Xero being one of them. They haven't come out and told us whether it will be different to how Auto Super is currently processed, whether there will be new screens, new buttons, a new process to follow. All we can assume so far with Xero is that it will be very similar to how Auto Super currently works. They have added a Pay Super Now button to their payroll screen, but that's really all we've got. We have been told that we can expect something to be released by Xero in the next 3-4 weeks. So hopefully we get some more context from them and some more information. They also haven't told us their Xero, I'm talking about here, sorry for those clients who aren't a Xero user, but Xero still haven't told us about their processing time in relation to dispersing the fund from their clearinghouse. So what happens, just to give some context, is currently if you do your Auto Super via Xero, is Xero will take the money from your bank account once you approve a batch, and they will actually hold that money for a number of days. So at the moment, I think it's around 14 days that they actually hold your money for, and they hold that before they then disperse it over to your employees' super funds, which is why if you've ever been given some reminders from us, especially in the lead up to the 30th June and making sure that you can claim that super deduction early, we always recommend it being so soon in the month. So software providers have been told by the government that they are only able to hold the money for 3 business days before they then have to disperse it to the employees' super funds. So it's important once we find out that information from, for example, Xero, that that's factored into your process, because if they're holding it for 3 days, that cuts down your time of the 7-day clock that ticks that you must have that received by the employees' funds. So that's, I guess, watch that space from Xero, and we'll have more communication around that from our end as well once we know. The other thing that we still haven't received final guidance on is how the ATO will handle that SGC process. So the ATO, they actually hosted a Payday Super webinar a couple of weeks ago. And in that, they confirmed that the process for SGC under Payday Super hasn't actually been finalised yet. It's crazy to just think that we're being, again, encouraged to prepare. You businesses are being encouraged to prepare, but a really key piece of that puzzle is still being figured out on the ATO's end. So currently, super guarantee charge, if you're late with super, is a voluntary kind of process unless you're picked up by the ATO in like a little mini data matching exercise. And you then have to manually prepare a whole heap of Excel forms and manual calculations submitted to the ATO. We don't know if that will continue. They have kind of floated the idea that super guarantee charge will be very automatic and very AI driven and automated in a way that they just have a system that will check business XYZ is late by 14 days. Here's your letter being issued out with the exact penalties and interest that you need to pay us by X amount of date. So watch this space in terms of how SGC will work. But hopefully you guys are never late and we don't ever get to that point, but something to keep in mind. All right, so to wrap things up, there are just some key takeaways that I wanted to leave you with today. So first one, and really clear one, Payday Super is coming. It is coming on 1 July 2026. There's no back out now, and it will represent that fundamental change to how and when super is paid. Under the new rules, super must be paid with wages. So it will become part of your payroll cycle and your payroll processing, rather than that quarterly task that you dealt with 3 months after on that quarterly level. Because of that shift, your systems and processes really matter more than ever. The way you pay super and the way that you process payroll and monitor your payments will directly impact your compliance. Preparing now, as I said, will save you that time, money, and stress later. Businesses that review their setup early are much less likely to run into issues once these rules take effect. And again, to reiterate that one about cash flow, we spent a little bit of time on that today. Your cash flow planning for your business is essential. Payday Super won't increase, of course, the amount of super that you have to pay overall. It will remain the same. But what does change is when the money leaves your business. And so that timing change is what the businesses now should be planning for. And just, I guess, a little timely reminder, now that we're on that topic, is it is important to remember that super is a responsibility that sits with the employers. And for those of you who operate through a company, unpaid super can continue to a director level consequence. So having the right systems and reviews in place will protect the business and its decision makers. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's webinar on Payday Super Explained. We won't be taking any live questions just because we've found that, especially when it comes to super and payroll, every business and scenario is different and really specific to yourself. So we would more like to tailor a response to our clients one-on-one. But if you do have any questions at all, or there's something that you would like clarity on when it comes to Payday Super or something that you're unsure about, please, you can contact us on our info@VI Partners email address on the screen. You can also call our office and speak to one of our friendly team members, or you can also reach out to your client manager directly, of course. They would be more than happy to answer any questions specific to your business. We have some resources on our website that are really helpful, especially when it comes to earnings and the things that the ATO are kind of putting out. So those resources sit under our resources tab on our website. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today. I just did want to thank you all so much for coming and attending the webinar. I really hope that you got a lot of helpful information out of it and that you maybe feel a little bit more confident in those things that you have to do to prepare for Payday Super, and that you can go away from this and make a plan. And that you've got all that background information on what you should be doing and what it means as a small business owner, because 1 July will be here before we know it. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.